I'm not putting this video together to criticize the Boss Bass Katana or anything like that. This is purely speculation on my part, and what I figured having this amp was that the amp voicing section was purely just a pre-baked EQ, meaning that it's just a different EQ curve, which, to be fair, that's kind of what different amp styles or different preamps are, is it just has a EQ of its own that's sort of built into the tone stack of the amp. And observing this amp with the vintage flat and modern, and looking at the waveforms, and then just doing it clean, I thought to myself, okay, it's just a regular EQ. Let's drive the gain up. There's some video demonstrations of the amp that I saw that suggested that the vintage mode would break up like a vintage amp. I thought maybe in my mind, I'm like, okay, so this is going to give it a SVT style drive or something like that, but they all break up the same. Now, I should note that this amp breaks up in a tubey kind of way, which isn't something that Boss has bothered to advertise or really put out there. They really just want to show you that it's Class AB, that it's loud for 60 watts, that it's got a whole bunch of effects in it. But the things I'm focused on with the amp are, the loudness and the feel, but the gain structure is really interesting because my other bass amp is a Gallion Kruger, and that's just clean as can be. This amp, you turn up the drive a little bit and you start to get the natural grit, natural compression. It starts to take on a tube-like kind of character, which is really cool because I don't really like a completely clean bass tone, but I don't really like a completely overdriven bass tone either. I like one that's pushed a little bit, and usually that would involve using a Sans amp style pedal or something like that. Turn up the gain until you start to hear it breaking up a little bit, and then there's your tone. But I can do that with this amp with no issue. Like, I don't have to turn on the drives or the compression on it. You just turn up the gain a little bit and it's good to go. have the Boss website on behind me because I wanted to see the way that they phrased this, and from what I can tell, they're calling it different amp voicings. And in my experience looking at the waveform and listening to it, I feel like it's just an EQ, which is sort of interesting because the amp section also has a button called shape, which affects the shape of the EQ at the beginning. So I almost feel like we've got two shapes here. It's very strange to me. I'm never really been a big fan of the pre-mid scoop. Again, my Gallien-Kruger amp is a MB115, and it has a contour button that scoops the mids something like 10 dB in the mids. Having used this Boss Katana on the Modern, I expected a bit of a mid scoop. Looking at the waveform, around 500 hertz, and every harmonic thereafter, so it'd be like 500 hertz, 1000 hertz, 2000 hertz. It was about 3 dB lower, and you can audibly hear it a little bit, but that's like the most minor scoop possible. When you cut out all of your mids, you lose your sound, your character, your ability to be heard with a bass. It's terrible. I really don't like the contour button on the GK or most of these amps that have that. It's aggressive and really bad. However, if you find the correct frequency that sounds harsh and bring it down a little bit, like they've done here, it sounds really good. Also, the Modern voicing, everything from about 5,000 to 10,000 hertz was actually like present. It was probably, I don't know, like 6 dB higher than the other settings, meaning that the extended treble is there, and I had the horn on for every section, which I think makes a difference in the recorded tone, not just the room tone. I don't know for a fact there. The Modern voicing gave it a lot of upper treble clarity, which I really like. I think some people may not. Now, I expected to hear a difference maybe in the gain structure, turning up the gain, but it sounds the same to me other than the EQ differences. I feel like the amp voicing section is just a simple EQ shift and not like a completely different thing. Like I have the Boss Katana for guitar back there, and that's very, very different from amp selection to amp selection. Clean, acoustic, crunch, lead, brown. You know, they're very different in the gain structure and the tone, not just an EQ section. This being a bass amp, I feel like they didn't want to go too heavy-handed, but it almost seems pointless if you have the shape button and an amp section that's not really changing anything else. You're just sort of selecting an EQ when you have a 4-band EQ with selectable mid-ranges as well. And the effects sections on the amp, you can build in a graphic EQ, you can build in a rotary, parametric EQ. You can put all this stuff in, but there's no reason to stack all these different EQ options. It's too much.